Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. The top stories today. President Trump says National Guard troops can begin to move out of Washington, D.C. after bringing calm back to the streets. A protester was charged for making terroristic threats after saying he would set fire to an area of New York City. The man was demanding to speak to New York's top politicians. It's hurricane season and the latest tropical storm Cristobal hit the Gulf Coast over the weekend. Now it's weakening, but many across the U.S. are still in for some heavy rain. And the Director General of the WHO during the SARS outbreak says China's response to the latest virus deserves criticism. Calm has returned to Washington, D.C. as peaceful protests take center stage and riots are quelled. President Trump says National Guard troops can now begin to withdraw.
President Trump notes everything is under perfect control in Washington, D.C. and said he's given the order for National Guard troops to start to withdraw. City officials in Washington last week requested assistance for local law enforcement. Protests involving violent riots, vandalism, arson, and looting had rocked the city for days. A protest on Saturday outside the White House was far smaller than authorities expected, though across the nation the number reached tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, and most of it turned out peacefully. The president on Twitter thanked the National Guard, Secret Service, and D.C. police for doing a fantastic job. Acting Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf said the administration's response had worked. Talking to Fox News' Chris Wallace on Sunday, he said it's not by happenstance or by chance, but because they took action early. Earlier this month, President Trump and Attorney General William Barr had encouraged governors to take timely action in calling on the federal government for assistance if protests got out of control, and they were assured that adequate forces were at hand. But this does not mean the president demanded the use of 10,000 active duty troops. Barr said the Trump administration agreed active duty military personnel should only be deployed as a last resort. Barr made the comments on CBS's Face the Nation on Sunday, addressing the network's claim. The Attorney General called the CBS report completely false. A White House official also pointed out the false claim as it was repeated by other media over the weekend. The White House Director of Strategic Communications wrote the president very clearly directed to search the National Guard, not active duty troops, adding, and we've seen powerful, peaceful demonstrations since.
And the former police officer accused of killing George Floyd is due in court today. Derek Chauvin will appear virtually before a judge this afternoon. He's facing charges of second-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. 3 ex-officers who were with him are accused of aiding and abetting him. And a Brooklyn man is facing charges after threatening to burn down New York's Diamond District. He demanded the city's mayor and state governor come out to speak with him or else he'd get gasoline and take that drastic action.
A Brooklyn man who threatened to burn down Manhattan's Diamond District if New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio didn't meet his demands was arrested and charged with making terroristic threats. The man identified himself as Ace Burns. He said he's giving a demonstration from Barclays Center and then bringing it to City Hall. He said he wants the mayor and governor to come out and talk and provide the youth with direction. He threatened to burn the Diamond District using gasoline if the 2 politicians did not meet his demands. The man made his demands during a live interview with Fox News. The New York City Police Department put a picture of the man's mask and said he was taken in to be interviewed. The man's real name is Israel Burns. In a video posted to his social media account, he can be seen giving a protest at Brooklyn's Barclays Center while wearing a Black Lives Matter medallion. Burns was charged with making terroristic threats, aggravated harassment, and false reporting. Officials say Burns is awaiting arraignment at the Brooklyn Criminal Court. De Blasio says he's lifting the city's 8 p.m. curfew after police eased up on enforcing it Saturday.
Because we got each day a better and better situation, more and more peaceful protesters coming out, better situation overall each day, fewer and fewer arrests, I made the decision to end the curfew. And honestly, I hope it's the last time we will ever need a curfew in New York City.
New York City is also entering phase 1 of reopening as CCP virus infections drop. Governor Cuomo is asking protesters to get tested.
act responsibly, get a test. Get a test. We're going to open 15 sites that are dedicated just to protesters.
The rest of New York State is already in or about to enter phase 2 of the governor's reopening plan.
Hurricane season is now in full swing, and Tropical Storm Cristobal has weakened, but heavy rain is expected throughout the country over the next few days.
The National Hurricane Center downgraded Tropical Storm Cristobal to a tropical depression following the weekend and discontinued previous tropical storm warnings. But forecasters predict storm surges as Cristobal threatens Louisiana with flooding water after making landfall. The storm will also dump rain that could lead to flash flooding, mostly across the Mississippi River Valley in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas. The National Hurricane Center director warned people to stay off the roads in affected areas.
This is all through Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Florida. I mean, it's just a very large storm. Any area could get some heavy rainfall. It's very efficient, very tropical rainfall. It rains a whole bunch real quick is really the takeaway here. So you got to be careful out there.
Cristobal is the third named storm of the 2020 hurricane season. It made landfall Saturday afternoon in Louisiana, south of New Orleans, with winds up to 50 miles per hour, causing flooding in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. And a tornado took out power lines and uprooted trees in Florida Sunday afternoon as the storm approached. Cristobal is forecasted to continue through Arkansas and eastern Missouri Monday night and Tuesday. It should reach Wisconsin and the western Great Lakes by Wednesday.
A suspect accused of killing a Northern California sheriff's deputy over the weekend is now in the hospital. Officials have confirmed that the suspect is an active duty member of the Air Force. Suspect Stephen Carrillo has been accused of killing Sergeant Damon Gutzwiller Saturday night. The incident occurred when deputies responded to a 911 call, alerting them to a suspicious van carrying guns and bomb-making devices. On the scene, the deputies were ambushed with shrapnel or gunfire. Gutzwiller died in the hospital. Travis Air Base has confirmed that Carrillo is a member of its 60th Security Forces Squadron. The FBI is investigating whether the incident is related to the killing of another officer in Oakland, California last month. And in other news, the nation's rural transit systems have barely been able to continue their services amid the CCP virus pandemic. Some of them even had to shut down, but a recent executive order signed by the president could possibly help them through the crisis.
Rural transit agencies in the U.S. are struggling to keep their operations running amid the pandemic. Lately, they've been surviving on only half the relief funding they were meant to receive from the CARES Act, $2.2 billion instead of $4 billion. Their aid cut just before the bill passed. Corporate site selection consultant John Boyd says it's because the agencies aren't making themselves heard.
They're trying to keep their heads above water, quite frankly. They lack the wherewithal and the resources to effectively document just how dire their financial situation is, and the lack of resources to effectively articulate that to Congress.
Many of these agencies are now failing due to insufficient funds. Boyd says this poses a huge problem for people dependent on rural transit.
Think about who relies upon rural transit. Elderly and low-income people that need access to their healthcare providers, whether that be cancer screenings or dialysis, or people that rely upon rural transit to get to work each day.
The question now is whether or not these transit systems will accompany the rest of the nation's economy on the road to recovery. A recent executive order signed by the White House is aimed at speeding up infrastructure projects. Boyd says it's just what rural transit needs.
I think part of the post-COVID-19 environment will be a new infrastructure, talk of new infrastructure. And I think that's a new platform for advocates of rural economic development to advocate for new funds devoted to rural transit.
Boyd also says the agencies need to further mobilize their workforce and be more vocal in Congress.
And a treasure chest estimated to be worth over $1 million and was hidden in the Rocky Mountains for a decade has finally been found. Ardent Antiques collector Forrest Fenn hid the treasure over a decade ago. He used it to create a treasure hunt to inspire people to explore nature and give hope to those affected by the Great Recession. Fenn left clues to the treasure's location in a poem published in his 2010 autobiography. He announced Sunday the treasure had been found. He told the Santa Fe New Mexican that the man who found the chest a few days ago wants to stay anonymous. And in New Zealand, the Prime Minister says the country has officially eradicated CCP virus and will go back to normal now that the last known infected person has recovered.
New Zealand welcomed the news that there are no active cases of the coronavirus for the first time since the virus arrived in the country in late February. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said Monday her country will lift all containment measures except for border restrictions beginning at midnight.
Not only have we protected New Zealanders' health, we now have a head start on our economic recovery.
And when asked how she celebrated the milestone, she answered,
"I did a little dance."
The news sets New Zealand on course to eliminate the disease from its shores and open up its economy. That's largely thanks to 7 weeks of a strict lockdown, where businesses were shut and all but essential workers stayed home. Now she's calling for collective action to unite for the country's economic recovery, encouraging people to buy local products and support local businesses to get them back on their feet. In total, New Zealand reported 22 deaths and more than 1,000 cases among its 5 million population. The country's Ministry of Health said Monday the last person being monitored for the disease had recovered. But officials are cautious about claiming victory. Ardern warned that elimination of the virus does not mean permanent eradication. For New Zealand, it will indicate 28 days of no so-called chains of transmission, which would fall on June 15.
And coming up, tensions are high between China and Australia over calls for an international investigation into the CCP virus. Find out what Beijing is saying in response after the break.
Hello there. Doesn't it feel like we're moving further away from the very values that our republic was built upon? And the media in our country have just been adding fuel to the flame, which is why you need to try The Epoch Times. It's pure, honest journalism that's restoring traditional values and reports the news with no spin, no hidden agendas, and no false narratives. So if you want to know the truth about the FISA abuse that took place during the 2016 election, or how socialist and communist ideologies have been infiltrating our society, or how the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up led to this global pandemic, and so much more, then you need to try The Epoch Times. And for a limited time, you can try the paper yourself for a full month for just a single $1, and we'll send you a very special gift. A 58-page magazine that investigates the truth behind the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up of the virus. So go to readepoch.com, try The Epoch Times, get your free gift, and stay truly informed.
And a warning against using China as a trustworthy partner in the fight against the virus pandemic. A former Director General of the World Health Organization says she's not sure if Beijing deliberately covered up the virus outbreak, but if they did, it would be nothing new.
The World Health Organization's former Director General questions whether China's cover-up of the virus outbreak was deliberate. She says there was no doubt China wanted to cover up the SARS epidemic in 2003. Gro Harlem Brundtland was Prime Minister of Norway for 3 terms and co-chaired an independent monitoring body for global health crises. In an interview with Germany's news magazine Der Spiegel, she lists 3 main reasons to criticize China's response to the virus outbreak that has caused a months-long global pandemic. In her words, the response was too slow, and they informed the world too late. But worst of all, she said, Beijing did not acknowledge that the infection could pass from person to person until 19 days after it was already clearly discernible. She said from the initial outbreak, experts at the WHO were trying to get more information out of China, an all too familiar experience for Brundtland. She was Director General of the WHO when the highly contagious respiratory illness, later named SARS, first appeared in November 2002 in Guangdong, China. She said the WHO was given excuses by Beijing and turned away for weeks in an effort to cover up the epidemic. Republican Senator Rick Scott, speaking on BBC's Andrew Marr show on Friday, said he can't give an instance where Communist China has tried to be a great partner to the rest of the world. He said the U.S. intelligence community has evidence that Beijing is trying to sabotage or slow down Western development of a vaccine, deciding to be an adversary to Americans and to democracy around the world. And if Communist China creates a CCP virus vaccine first, he says he's certain they won't share it with the West.
And tensions between China and Australia remain high. Australia says Beijing is ignoring calls for diplomatic trade talks after Canberra voiced support for an investigation into the virus's origin.
Australian Trade Minister Simon Birmingham says China remains unresponsive to Australia's weeks-long pleas to ease trade tensions between them. Canberra had earlier called for an international inquiry into the origins of the CCP virus, prompting the strain. The Chinese regime later accused Australia of playing petty tricks and threatened that Chinese consumers could boycott Australian products if Australia pursued the inquiry. China has since suspended beef imports from 4 of Australia's largest meat processors and imposed hefty tariffs on barley, though both sides say it's unrelated to the spat. Birmingham has been requesting discussions with his Chinese counterpart for weeks, but he said Beijing has been ignoring Canberra's pleas. China did not deny the comment. Australia says the virus most likely originated in a wildlife market in the city of Wuhan, but the country insists that the call for an independent investigation into the pandemic is not politically motivated. A poll from the newspaper The Australian on Monday showed 79% of Australians backed a global investigation.
And still to come, HSBC applies pressure on the UK's Prime Minister over Huawei. And UK Airlines considers joint legal action over the government's quarantine plan. That and more after the break.
"90% of news outlets in the United States are controlled by 6 corporations. They're not out to tell you the truth of what's happening. They're out to tell you the picture of the world that they represent. The mission of the Epoch Times is to chase the truth, to ground all statements in facts, and prevent people from being misled. This is a battle between truth and deceit. Subscribe today and join the Americans who are seeking truth and tradition. We'd love to have you on board."
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people. I'm a little freaked out that many people have seen my face. In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the sole source of edutainment worldwide.
And more news from Europe. HSBC is applying pressure on the UK's Prime Minister over Huawei. And UK Airlines are considering joint legal action over the government's quarantine plan. Here's NTD UK's Neil Woodrow.
Thanks. Welcome to NTD UK, bringing you UK and European news. I'm Neil Woodrow. Hong Kong bank HSBC's CEO tells the UK's Prime Minister that if the UK blocks Huawei's 5G, the bank will get reprisals in China. Along with Standard Chartered, the banks face angry sentiments after stating support for Beijing's new one country, two systems destroying law in Hong Kong. The Telegraph reported the Conservative chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee as saying, quite clearly, Beijing is now putting pressure on other businesses in relation to Huawei, which tells you the importance they attach to this. Staying in the UK, world heavyweight boxing champion Anthony Joshua spoke out at a Black Lives Matter march in his hometown of Watford, England on Saturday. The event was one of many held across the country over the weekend.
The virus has been declared a pandemic. It is out of control. And I'm not actually talking about COVID-19. The virus I'm referring to is called racism.
Joshua likens racism to the CCP virus as something currently affecting all levels of society around the world. He says that communities already possess the vaccine for racism.
Me and you are the vaccine. I am the vaccine.
Unlike protests elsewhere in the capital, the one Joshua attended remained peaceful, something he praises.
We must not use a demonstration for selfish motives and turn it into rioting and looting.
People attending the march appeared not to be practicing social distancing, despite the organisers urging protesters to stay safe. In international relations, the UK is trying to become a dialogue partner of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. The British government on Friday has applied for a partnership with the 10-member ASEAN in order to boost post-Brexit ties in Asia. The UK already has an ambassador to ASEAN, but now seeks further opportunities in trade, education, science and security. Now air travel. All travellers entering the UK must self-quarantine for 14 days starting today. Airlines have labelled this policy useless and may take joint legal action.
With planes grounded since late March, airlines are hoping to start flying in July. But some say the UK's new policy for incoming travellers will hamper airlines' recovery. Ryanair Group CEO Michael O'Leary describes the plan as useless and a threat to the tourism industry.
And at a time, what we don't understand as an industry, at a time when all other European countries, Italy, Greece, Spain, Portugal, are removing restrictions, removing visitor restrictions, the UK is imposing them.
The relations between the UK government and airlines are frayed by the quarantine plans. British Airways, Ryanair and EasyJet are considering a joint legal action against them. The industry says they were not consulted on the unjustified and disproportionate plan.
The three big airlines in the UK are planning to cut almost 20,000 jobs while using the government's job support scheme. On to Germany, where a German man suspected of abducting young Madeleine McCann may have been involved in another kidnapping of a little girl. Now prosecutors have opened an investigation into whether the man could be linked to a 2015 disappearance.
5-year-old Inga Gericke went missing during a family barbecue in May 2015. A child abuse suspect known as Christian B. lived a few miles away from Inga's home. 8 months after the girl went missing, police searched his caravan and found images of child abuse on a USB memory stick, but did not charge him over Inga's disappearance. 43-year-old Christian B. is also a suspect of the murder of 3-year-old British girl Madeleine McCann. Madeleine disappeared from her hotel room during a family holiday at a Portuguese resort in May 2007. German prosecutors are now assuming she is dead. The suspect lived in the area where Madeleine disappeared. He is now in custody after being convicted of raping a 72-year-old American woman in 2005.
In Italy, Vatican police on June 5th arrested an Italian middleman who was part of a deal in which the Vatican used church money to purchase an investment property. Gianluigi Tozzi was the Vatican's fiduciary in the purchase of a building in London's Chelsea district several years ago for $200 million. A lengthy investigation into the deal by Vatican police has led to the suspension of 5 Vatican employees, the resignation of the Vatican's police chief, and the departure of the former head of the Vatican's Financial Information Authority. The Vatican says Tozzi is accused of extortion, embezzlement, aggravated fraud, and money laundering. And in Spain, Madrid's iconic El Prado and Reina Sofia museums reopened to visitors on Saturday for the first time since lockdown.
Visitors must wear face masks, have temperature checks and keep a safe distance. People are delighted at finally being able to admire the masterpieces again. Some even cried tears of joy.
I was really looking forward to coming back, really looking forward to it. And that finally it can open makes me very emotional.
Many people noted how quiet the museums were. As one of the main tourist attractions in Madrid, the museums are usually full of visitors.
And this first time I left my house will remain in my memory forever because I came here to the Prado, a beautiful place to enjoy and with just a few people.
According to the museum's directors, the sharply reduced and carefully staggered number of visitors will help the museum's management to analyse what changes could be done to improve the art experience.
Just for the art and with the passion we have for it makes me very happy to be here.
The museums are not yet fully open, but many masterpieces are on display.
Prado's director said the museum could place permanent limits on crowds, meaning the pandemic may change the way people appreciate art. That's all for now from the UK. Back to New York.
Thanks, Neil. And coming up, game parks in South Africa are stopping poachers in their tracks, and find out how Knights in France are keeping social distance in the country's second largest theme park. Wildlife officials in South Africa have removed the horns of dozens of rhinos to protect them. Experts say poaching is up during the pandemic.
South Africa has dehorned dozens of rhinos in 3 popular game parks, a move aiming to prevent armed poachers taking advantage of a crashing tourism to kill rhinos for their horns. The controversial exercise leaves rhinos with horn rumps too small for poachers to bother with. The team then headed to a spot where they tranquilized a female rhino before removing her horn with an electric saw. One of her calves had to be restrained. But Jacob says the main goal is to protect the animals.
One of the only solutions that we have now is to trim the rhino's horns, and so we've started this unprecedented practice to try and protect these animals by removing their horns. We're not saying it's the absolute solution.
Working alongside authorities, they began dehorning 3 years ago. Jacob said they had since seen a drop in poaching. The numbers of rhinos in the parks and how many have been poached are kept secret to protect them. The creatures have walked the earth for 30 million years, but decades of hunting and habitat loss have reduced their numbers to about 27,000 today, according to the International Rhino Foundation. A rhino horn sells for about $60,000 a kilogram. That's more than cocaine or gold. In East Asia, it's used in medicinal potions, despite containing the same key component as human fingernails. Dehorning is controversial, especially as it makes male rhinos vulnerable in fights. But horns are not essential for survival, and like fingernails, they do grow back.
And the virus is changing history in more ways than one. Damsels and knights at a French medieval amusement park are adapting to modern safety measures so they can go back in time again.
France's second largest theme park is putting on the final touches before reopening to the public. The Puy de Fou's 6,200 staff, including 4,000 volunteers, have been preparing from home under lockdown.
We all can't wait to see our audience again.
The park's president says visitors can go back in time while maintaining modern social distancing guidelines.
We are very confident about welcoming our visitors in the best conditions.
Though they didn't have to do social distancing in medieval times, today's damsels and knights are adapting for the stage.
All of the choreography has been modified, meaning when Marguerite is strangled in one scene before Joan of Arc comes to save her, all that physical contact was totally reworked.
Costumes will also adapt, couturiers resewing costumes to add masks or facial coverings. The Puy de Fou Park relives battles, legends and myths from the Middle Ages. It had 2.3 million visitors last year, but this month visitors are limited to 7,000.
That's the latest updates for now. Thank you for tuning in. Catch up again at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Paul Graney.